Imagine, if you will, an environment of like oppressive suburban daily life. The sun is shining, the lawns are perfectly manicured, the palm trees are swaying in the breeze.
Right, the classic Southern California postcard.
Exactly. But underneath that picture-perfect postcard, there's this simmering, suffocating tension. It's boredom, but it's mixed with a very real, very physical friction with the local police.
Yeah, real powder keg.
So ask yourself, if you are dropped into that environment, how do you respond? Do you just, keep your head down and accept it? Or do you tear the whole thing down and build something completely new in its place?
Well, I mean, it is the ultimate question of conformity versus rebellion, right?
Oh.
And human nature being what it is, the vast majority of people will inevitably choose to conform to their environment.
Because it's easier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Simply because building something entirely new requires a massive, almost unreasonable amount of energy.
Well, today, we are looking at a group of kids who decided to spend that unreasonable amount of energy. We're exploring a truly fascinating 2026 column from MMR titled Black Flag, the Critical Point of Southern California Hardcore.
It's a great piece.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to figure out how Black Flag wasn't just, a band playing music. They were a complete structural change.
Yeah, total paradigm shift.
Right. They were a living, breathing methodology for the West Coast underground that redefined how independent art is made, how it's distributed, and how it survives outside the traditional system. Okay, let's unpack this.
To truly understand the magnitude of this movement, we have to immediately look past the traditional, comfortable idea of commercial success.
Like album sales and stuff?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
If you are measuring their impact in record sales or Billboard chart positions, you're entirely missing the point. We need to focus on the how and the why.
So the process over the product.
Precisely. We are looking at a fiercely DIY spirit and an absolute uncompromising independence that essentially created a realistic blueprint for generations of artists that followed them.
I love that idea of a blueprint.
Yeah.
But to understand it, we need to look at the ground it was built on. The source material takes us back to 1976, Southern California, specifically the area around Hermosa Beach.
Right.
What exactly was happening in that specific time and place that allowed this to incubate?
Well, the band actually started out under the name Panic, spearheaded by a guitarist named Greg Ginn. At this particular moment in time, punk rock is just starting to ripple out globally.
Like you have the UK scene exploding.
Yeah, you have sounds coming from the UK, from New York. The influence of bands like the Ramones and the Sex Pistols is very clear. But the Southern California scene that Panic was operating in was, well, incredibly immature by comparison.
Immature how?
It wasn't a defined culture yet. It was essentially a void.
And operating in a void gives you a certain kind of freedom.
Oh, absolutely.
The source notes they eventually changed their name from Panic to Black Flag. And historically, the Black Flag is an anarchist symbol. But the column makes a really crucial distinction here.
Yes, it does.
For this band, adopting that name wasn't about putting forth a strict academic political manifesto.
Exactly. It was much more visceral than that. It was a raw feeling of denying order and denying stability.
Just pure rejection.
Right. Because the suburban culture they were living in was so obsessed with order and surface-level perfection that simply expressing genuine, ugly frustration was an act of rebellion.
Wow.
And to accompany the name, they adopted a logo, the famous 4 black bars.
Oh, yeah, you still see that tattooed on people today.
You do. It's simple, it's stark, and it's instantly recognizable. It functions almost like a corporate brand logo, but engineered specifically for anti-establishment sentiment.
It's like trying to build a disruptive startup in your parents' garage. But instead of being fueled by venture capital, it's fueled purely by suburban angst and a rejection of the status quo.
That is a perfect way to put it.
And alongside that highly effective visual identity, Greg Ginn was developing a signature musical sound. The source really emphasizes his guitar work from the very beginning.
His tone was characterized by excessive distortion and these relentless, repetitive riffs. Ginn's guitar didn't sound like traditional rock and roll.
It sounded like a weapon.
Yeah, it sounded like the physical tension of their environment. What's fascinating here is that their early days were defined by extreme turnover.
Right. The column mentions they were constantly cycling through members, like frequently changing bassists, drummers, and singers.
It was a revolving door.
Which is crazy to me. I have to push back on something here because usually Basically, if a startup or a sports team or a band loses its key players and cycles through replacements just to survive, we call that a failure. We call that a decline.
Sure, in a normal context.
But the source material frames this differently. How does a revolving door of members actually help a band?
Well, what's fascinating here is that for Black Flag, instability actually prevented their musical direction from stagnating. In a traditional setting, a band gets comfortable, they lock into a groove, and they repeat themselves. But because the lineup was constantly fracturing and rebuilding around Greg Ginn, the music was forced to stay volatile.
It couldn't get stale because it was always fighting for its life.
Exactly. The Southern California suburban culture, combined with the constant police tension, meant their anger wasn't some abstract theatrical concept. It was a highly practical, immediate response to their daily environment.
And the turnover kept that response sharp.
Precisely.
So all of that restless, suffocating energy desperately needed an outlet. Which brings us to their first concrete strike against the music industry in 1979.
The release of their EP, Nervous Breakdown.
Yeah, this is where the methodology really begins to take physical form.
It really is. This was completely independent, distributed under their own newly formed label, SST Records.
We'll definitely get into SST a bit later because that is a whole story on its own.
Oh, for sure. But the sound captured on that record is entirely focused. It's short, fast, direct, and it possessed a standout aggressiveness that simply did not exist on the West Coast at that time.
I want to look at the format itself because the column specifically focuses on it being a 7-inch record.
Right.
Why that format?
Yeah.
How does the actual physical format of a 7-inch vinyl influence the art that gets put on it?
Well, the mechanics of vinyl dictate the art. A 7-inch record playing at 45 RPM gives you very little physical space for grooves.
You literally run out of room.
Exactly. You simply cannot put a sprawling, self-indulgent 10-minute epic on it without the audio quality degrading. The format literally demands a sprint-like focus from the listener. It enforces brevity and intensity by its very physical nature.
That makes so much sense. It's a physical container that forces a burst of energy and then it's just over.
And that sprint was anchored by a vocalist named Keith Morris.
Right. His style is described in the piece as closer to pure shouting, prioritizing absolute immediacy over technical skill.
It wasn't about hitting the right notes at all. It was about hitting the listener with the reality of the emotion.
Yeah.
And when you look at the thematic weight of the title track, Nervous Breakdown, that intensity makes perfect sense. The song is explicitly about mental collapse.
But not in a sad, slow way.
No, rather than being some slow, introspective ballad about falling apart, it presents the collapse as a raw, naked, high-speed emotion. It puts you inside the panic attack.
Wow.
That specific approach essentially created the basic template for all hardcore punk that followed.
But you can't live inside a panic attack forever, right? Sprinting at that level of speed and raw emotion is unsustainable without massive friction.
It really is.
And eventually Keith Morris leaves the band due to musical and internal tensions.
Right. He goes on to form the Circle Jerks, focusing on an even faster, more materialistic style of hardcore.
But his departure leaves Black Flag in a really precarious position.
This is the moment where Greg Ginn essentially seizes complete control. He realizes that to ensure this band survives as a long-term project, someone has to act as the architect and steer the ship through the storm.
Right. Someone has to be the boss.
Yeah. So they go through this highly unstable transition period with multiple short-term singers. Eventually, Ron Reyes, who also went by the name Chavo Pederast, steps in for their next major release, The Jealous, again 7-inch.
How did bringing in Reyes change the mechanics of their sound?
Yeah.
Because the source was a very specific shift in the vocal delivery here.
Reyes brought a more restrained dynamic.
Really? Restraint.
Well, compared to Morris's frantic shouting, yeah.
Sure.
Reyes had clear word boundaries. You can actually hear the articulation of the lyrics.
Oh, I see.
And by pulling back just a fraction on the vocal chaos, it suddenly highlights the actual structure and the rhythm of the underlying songs. It proves that their initial raw impulse was beginning to move toward genuine refinement.
They were evolving.
Exactly. The song Jealous Again tackled simple jealousy, but with an aggressive, almost cynical edge. It showed they were capable of actual songwriting structure while maintaining their ferocity.
Okay, so that refinement process hits its ultimate tipping point in 1981.
Yes, the big one.
This is when they find a frontman whose intensity could finally truly match Greg Ginn's singular vision, completely altering their trajectory.
Enter Henry Rollins.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Henry Rollins was not a local Southern California kid.
No, not at all.
He was a dedicated fan of the band, living all the way across the country in Washington, D.C. He literally traverses the country to audition and becomes the face of the band he worshipped.
It's an incredible story.
But beyond that fan-to-frontman dynamic, what did his arrival physically do to the band's output?
Rollins brought a deeply physical, incredibly intimidating stage presence.
He was a really intense guy.
Very. And with his arrival came a massive lyrical shift. The band moved away from just outward anger, being mad at the police or mad at suburban society, and shifted toward deep personal agony.
More inward-looking.
Exactly. The themes became about isolation, inward obsession, and profound internal struggle.
This era also kicks off their massive full-scale U.S. tours. But they aren't playing like traditional music venues, are they?
Oh, definitely not.
The source describes these gigs as wildly chaotic, taking place in DIY spaces and unpermitted venues.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to consider how logistics dictate environment and how environment dictates art.
Okay.
They are playing VFW halls, rented basements, anywhere that would let them plug in. And these gigs frequently resulted in violent clashes with local police across the entire country.
So the friction followed them.
It did. The constant threat of violence, the sheer friction with authority night after night, that reality directly seeped into the texture of the music.
And you can't just shake that off.
Right. You cannot play in a combative zone every night and go back to writing simple, upbeat songs. That environment made their sound vastly heavier and more complex.
But sustaining that kind of unofficial touring circuit across the country requires massive resources.
Huge resources.
And Black Flag couldn't just walk into the offices of Columbia Records or Warner Bros. And ask for tour support. The traditional music industry locked them out.
Completely.
So they had to build their own infrastructure.
Ah.
How do they actually do that? Like, how do you manufacture and distribute records across the country when the entire industry refuses to work with you?
You build a shadow supply chain. And that brings us back to SST Records.
Right.
We mentioned SST earlier, but we really need to look at the mechanics of it. SST Records was originally the name of Greg Ginn's electronics company. He sold ham radio equipment.
Wait, really? Ham radios?
Yeah, ham radios.
How does selling niche electronics translate into running an underground record label?
Well, think about the logistical overlap. Running a mail-order ham radio business means you already understand how to print catalogs, right?
Okay.
You know how to source niche manufacturing, how to manage inventory, and how to ship boxes of product to highly specific, passionate customers across the country.
Oh, wow.
Ginn took that exact logistical framework and simply swapped out radio parts for 7-inch vinyl records.
That is brilliant.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean? It means they aren't just writing songs, they are operating a manufacturing and logistics supply chain out of sheer willpower.
Exactly. And it transformed into a fully independent record label. They didn't just release Black Flag, they started releasing music for a whole roster of other underground bands.
Which insane when you think about the workload.
They handled absolutely everything. They booked their own studio time. They handled the jacket printing, literally sitting on the floor folding and gluing the cardboard sleeves by hand.
Just endless manual labor.
Yes. They called independent pressing plants. And they booked their own grueling tours using a network of public payphones, calling local punk kids in random cities to secure basements and halls to play in.
The source material calls this a literal punk economic zone. It was an entirely self-sustaining ecosystem, completely free from major label dependence.
It was revolutionary.
It's like they built an off-grid electrical system right under the nose of the city grid.
That is the crucial legacy of Black Flag. This DIY model became the realistic, functional precedent for the entire indie rock and hardcore scenes that followed.
It proved it could be done.
Right. It proved that you could bypass the gatekeepers entirely if you were willing to do the manual labor. The physical posture of doing it all yourself, the grueling labor of the business, became completely inseparable from the music itself.
But that labor has a cost, doesn't it? I mean, running your own supply chain, acting as your own booking agent from a payphone, all while enduring violent, combative shows night after night. That takes an unimaginable physical toll.
It really does.
And the column highlights something incredible here. This sheer physical exhaustion literally, physically changed the tempo of their music.
It is a fascinating study in biomechanics. Touring in a van with no air conditioning, sleeping on floors, fighting hostile crowds, your adrenaline eventually depletes.
You just burn out.
You literally cannot play at 200 beats per minute every single night for 6 months. Muscle fatigue sets in. So the band begins to shift drastically from their early, short, fast style to much, much slower, heavier music.
Right, the riffs become incredibly repetitive, almost trance-like. Noise textures are heavily emphasized over clean chords.
And the songs get significantly longer.
The live gigs turn into these grueling endurance tests amidst intensely violent mosh pits. It's incredibly ironic, though.
How so?
The very fans who fell in love with them for sprinting on Nervous Breakdown were now showing up to clubs and being put through this slow-motion, heavy endurance test.
This raises an important question. How do we define musical evolution?
Right, because fans resist change.
They do. And at the time, many early fans saw this slowdown and accused the band of stagnating or losing their original energy. But the reality is the exact opposite.
It wasn't stagnation.
No. This slowdown was a direct, honest reflection of their physical exhaustion and the immense mental tension born from that DIY tour life. When you are that exhausted, you play slower, but you hit the instruments harder.
You feel the weight of it.
Exactly. You drag the tempo, and it creates a sense of crushing weight.
And that heavy shift laid the critical groundwork for the future of heavy music. The source draws a direct line from that slow, heavy Black Flag era to the creation of later genres.
Absolutely. When you take the aggression of punk rock and physically slow it down into this heavy, dragging tempo, you get the fundamental ingredients for sludge metal.
Wow, yeah.
You get the down-tuned, brooding energy that would eventually explode in the Pacific Northwest as grunge. By leaning into the physical reality of their exhaustion, they dissolved existing punk boundaries and pulled in audiences beyond just traditional punks.
So they mutated to survive, and in doing so, they mutated the entire musical landscape around them.
That's a great summary.
So as we synthesize the main takeaways from this MMR column, Black Flag was a band that eventually concluded its run. But their legacy isn't measured in records sold or mainstream awards.
No, their legacy is measured in their methodology. It's measured in their attitude, their uncompromising DIY spirit, and a system that provided an unshakable reference point for countless artists.
They refused to compromise.
Right. They proved that if a system rejects you, you don't have to change your art to fit the system. You just have to be willing to do the exhausting manual labor of building your own world.
And the source material leaves us with this incredible lingering thought that Black Flag's methodology is still being updated today.
It's very relevant right now.
So look at your own life, your own career, or your own creative passions. In a world full of gatekeepers and established right ways of doing things, what is your version of SST Records? What is the system you can build from scratch today with your own two hands to bypass the gatekeepers entirely?
A phenomenal question to sit with. The tools have changed, but the required willpower remains exactly the same.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking to those blueprints, and we'll see you next time.